What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Sorry I've been gone so long. Started a new job last year and it kept me busy. But I took my Cal Yun list to my first ever grand tournament, the Clutch City GT. I had a lot of fun, made a lot of great people. So we're just gonna go straight into the list and explain my experience and how things went. So I chose the Kalyan detachment. It is my favorite detachment at the moment. And I had Shadow Sun as my warlord. I also had Farsight in there. So the way I build my list is I always have a section of Kroot, a Montcalm section, and then a Kalyan section. The reason I do that is because I feel like Tau have to be adaptable and they have to be able to change based off of the army, the opponent's army's style or detachment. And this is the best way in my opinion. So I had 5 Kroot Hounds. I had 10 Kroot. I had 3 Rampagers, and I had a Lone Spear. This is my, my Kroot style of play in my Kalyan detachment. They play a lot of my first and second round and do a lot of primary denial. Then I have my Montcalm style of play where we have a Piranha, 10 Pathfinders that will start in the Devilfish and allow the Devilfish to scout. An Enforcer Commander, and I put him with the Plasma Fire Knife and gave him the enhancement that allows me to get sustained hits in round 2, Exemplar of the Kalyan, or Exemplar of Kalyan. I had a Ghost Kill, and I'll explain why the Ghost Kill is in my Montcalm style of play in a second. Then I had Farsight with Star Scythe Flamer suits. I really like the Flamers being able to overwatch plus getting that +1 to wound. And then if you're shooting at infantry, you get that +1 AP. This is one of my favorite units in the Tau army. It's really strong. It just does a lot of work where you need it. Then we have Vespid for the uppy downy, scoring secondaries. In my Kalyan side, I have Shadow Sun, which is my warlord. I have 2 rail sides, and this time I gave them all the guns, the rail guns, this smart missile systems. I was trying to tech more a little bit towards Eldar, knowing that their codex came out, so I brought a lot of indirect. I had the Seeker missiles, and I also gave them the 2 missile pod drones apiece, so they just had a ton of shooting. Were really great whenever that sustained hits ability came up. Then I had a Riptide with the Ion. He's modeled with the burst cannon, but I always use the Ion. It's just better. And then I gave him the Plasma with the missile pods. Then I have a team of stealth suits where the Sergeant had a shield drone and a marker light drone, so he could have 3 wounds, makes him a little bit tougher to kill. Then I have a Skyray with the indirect, and I have a Hammerhead with Ion with indirect. Going into Clutch City, I think that the Ion Head was a mistake because there was a lot of vehicles without invulns at the Clutch City event. I think that the Rail Head would have done a lot better. But round 1, I went into Grey Knights, and there was 3 armies that I did not want to see, and that was Imperial Knight Armiger Spam, Demons, and Grey Knights. Obviously, Armiger Spam, with them having the 5-up invul in that range, the 12-inch movement, 8 OC, it's just very hard to take out a lot of them at once. I really have to focus down, 2 shooting units and 1 of my guiding units a lot of the times just to take out one of them, at least in this detachment. So it just wasn't a good matchup for me. And then Grey Knights and Demons, because they had that similar ability of just being able to teleport and go, not teleport, but go up and down and, have that that zone that buffs their army. So that would be a really difficult matchup. But unfortunately, game one was against Grey Knights. It was a great game, great opponent. The thing about grand tournaments that I'm starting to learn is that most people don't finish their games. Even you can go on War Games Live and see the stream. Even the stream games were struggling to finish the full 5 rounds. So this game, we only got to round 3, and we both got 3 rounds because he went first, and I was able to pull it out by 1 point because Farsight and my Vespid got behind enemy lines. And then we ran out of time in round 3, so it just ended there. The reason why we didn't talk it out is because it's kind of impossible to do that in a dice game. So we just kind of said, okay, whatever the points are the points, as long as we both got the same amount of turns. So I ended up pulling out that game by 1 point. It kind of went how you would think it would. They were just kind of hard to get to because they could just sit back and then uppy and then downy right where they wanted to. And they, with that new detachment where everybody gets re-rolled a hit roll or something like that, I don't know exactly what it was. It was a little bit difficult to survive, which I know with the other Grey Knight detachment that I've played a few times, it's a little bit easier to survive. I don't think that they have that damage output like they do in this new Grotmis detachment. But luckily, I was able to pull out that win by 1 point. But great opponent, great match. Game 2, I went into one of the lists I didn't want to see, which is Armiger spam. He had about 10 Armigers, 2 Immolators with 5-men Battle Sisters, and he had a Calidus Assassin and this one Imperial Agents unit. I'm not exact. I think they were like the breachers or something, with some character. I don't know exactly what they were, but they could infiltrate. They had 2 wounds apiece. They had a 4-up invuln, and they had a redeploy. So it was really difficult to take those that unit out early in the game. So that game did not go well for me at all. We didn't finish that game either. We only got to round 3 again. And but unfortunately, he was winning by a big margin at that point. I already knew Armiger spam. I played it a few times. Armiger spam is just not going to be a good matchup for me. I would just need the secondaries and the dice rolling to kind of go my way in order to win that matchup. But still, great game, great opponent. And then game 3, I had a really favorable matchup against Chaos Space Marines. He used the Creations of Bile, and he had a bunch of the Accursed Cultist and Fabian Bile. But yeah, that whole detachment was it was a really good matchup for me because pretty much everything he had was all melee, and using my Kroot and Vespid sometimes just to block that melee from being able to even move where they want to was really, really strong for me. So a lot of the times I will move towards my natural expansion objective, and then I'll just screen off that path to the natural expansion objective, and then they can't even get there that first turn. So I'm scoring primaries on that objective for multiple turns before they're even able to get there. And if they do try to get there, they charge something like my Piranha, which is what happened, and they just, with the sustained hits and all the shooting I have at the one unit, would just took them off the board instantly. And then he had 2 of those units. The other unit, so what I did was I knew that he had advance and charge, so I wrapped my Kroot around my Kalyun pieces. Now the broadsides were able to come out of reserve, so that was good. But around my Hammerhead, my Skyray, my Riptide, and Shadow Sun, I was able to wrap my Kroot Carnivores around them, and then use my Rampagers to stay close. So when he did charge, I could heroic intervene and pop those mortals. So that is actually what happened, and it worked really, really well. And after I did that, obviously he survived. He killed the crew carnivores, survived the melee with the rampagers, but then I just fell them back and absolutely blasted the unit off the board. As you know, getting sustained hits, it's not really, nothing is going to survive against all of that shooting. So yeah, I won that game, and day one I went 2-1. Great experience, great opponents. I made a lot of friends there with the opponents that I did play. Nobody was rude or anything like that. Everybody was great. Everybody was fun to play with. Now, the next day was a huge struggle for me, not because of the matchups, but because everyone wanted to use the clock. Now, this is my first GT. I've never used a clock, never in an RTT. So I was struggling really, really bad. And I'll explain what I mean. Is essentially, I was playing Bridgehead Imperial Guard, I believe. And he basically ran infantry spam with a lot of scions and aquilins and some indirect fire with Ursula Creed. That's kind of all I remember. That wasn't everything he had, but it was basically guard with no tanks, all infantry. And honestly, that was a great matchup for me, and it went exactly how I thought it would. But me never using the clock before, I didn't realize how fast your time runs down, especially because the clock starts in deployment. It doesn't start when the game officially starts. It just starts whenever you start to deploy. So I didn't notice how fast you run out of clock time. And a lot of the times whenever we would switch over to his turn, I would just completely forget about the clock and my time would just run down. So I clocked out by, what was it, my third turn, by the end of my third turn, and I went first. By the end of my third turn, he was winning. Or no, by the end of turn 3, round 3, he was winning because I clocked out and I wasn't able to stop anything. I didn't know that when you clock out, you can't do actions, you can't move, you can't shoot, you can't overwatch, which was a huge deal because I was about to score 15 on primary, turn 4. And one big change in the game is I had Farsight on in my Flamer unit on his natural expansion objective, and he deep striked a like 15-man Scion, or I don't think it's Scions, it was like something like that, Scion or Aquilins, one shooty unit, deep strike right by them, and I couldn't even overwatch them with 6d6 flamers, +1 to wound, +1 AP, right, and guard only having 4 or 5 up saves. That would have completely annihilated the unit. But unfortunately, I learned a hard lesson about clock time and how fast you actually have to move. And essentially, my opponent was able to score about 30 to 35 points in his last in his turn 3, 4, and 5, and I was only able to just sit on the primaries that I was already on, which was my natural expansion objective. I held, but he was able to blast me off of all of the other objectives because I couldn't get any extra turns. And I don't want to complain about the clock too much. If you want to be a good player, you have to learn it. So that's just what I'm going to have to do. But unfortunately, it hurt me a ton in my last 3 matchups. So my opponent ended up pulling that one out. It was rough. I wasn't a big fan of it, but I also wasn't going to complain. I just wanted to have fun. So then the next game I went into was World Eaters. Another great matchup. I've played World Eaters a ton of times with this list style, or with Kalyun, and every single time it's the same. I just screen their movement, don't even let them get close, and blast them off the board as they step out. And that's essentially what happened all game. By the end of the game, by turn 3, I clocked on my third turn again. So yes, I clocked on my third turn again. But by the end of my third turn, so I clocked at the end of my third turn. By the end of my third turn, he only had Angron, a Demon Prince, a Rhino, and some cultists left. And essentially the only things that were dead in my army were the Piranha. All of my crew stuff was dead, and my Vespid. Everything else in my army was still alive. And then he ended up, so I was winning 26-24 by the end of round 3. So after his turn and I went first, by the end of round 3, I was winning. And then he picked up a secret mission. And when I was about to start my turn 4, I clocked. Or I realized that I clocked, and I wasn't able to do anything to stop him again. And he got the secret mission. And obviously, when he told me, I knew it was to get Angron onto my home objective, and that's what he did. I wasn't able to move or shoot Angron for 2 turns. So that was unfortunate. Again, my opponent scored about 30 points in his last 2 turns, and there was just nothing I could really do about it. But that's just kind of the thing that you have to learn playing GTs, is that most people are not going to finish games, and you have to really try to max out your points early. So if you don't finish the game, you can be ahead. So yeah, I was definitely gonna pull out the win there if I hadn't clocked, just like the Imperial Guard game. And again, the Imperial Guard game, the only things that were dead were my Ghost Keel, Piranha, and my crew. Everything else was still alive. While he only had about 5 units left, and I pinned him in his quarter, right, in his deployment zone. So that Imperial Guard game and the World Eaters game were very similar, to where I almost tabled my opponent. If I would have gotten 5 turns, I most likely would have been able to table my opponent and take the win. But unfortunately, I clocked, and that's something you have to deal with if you want to be a good player. So that's something I'm going to have to get better at. And then for my last game, I went up against Blood Angels, and he was playing the Angelic Inheritors. I think that's like the uppy downy version of Blood Angels. I'm not really sure. I just know that he had a lot of Death Company and those the golden guys. I forgot what they're called, but they're like gold, and they're pretty good at combat. So this time I clocked at the end of my, or at the start of my 4th turn. So the start of my 4th turn, right, again, everything was alive except my Kroot and my Piranha. Everything else in the list, and my Vespid were dead as well. But everything else in the list was still alive, where by the end of my round 4, he had a Calidus, 1 Vindicator, a 5-man Marine unit, like the basic Marine unit, a 5-man of the Golden Boys, and a Scout Squad, and he had a couple of infiltrators with that lone op character that can join them, the Librarian, the Phobos Librarian. So essentially, if I would have been able to go my 4th round, I would have been able to kill everything off of objectives that he had, because whenever I started my 4th round, I was able to declare that I was doing the secondaries that I was doing, and move the Hammerhead. And as soon as I finished moving the Hammerhead, which was the first model that I moved, I clocked. And he was nice enough to let me shoot the Hammerhead into what I wanted to shoot it at, but I couldn't guide it. I really couldn't do anything, and I think that he was able to make the unit -1 to hit. I'm not 100% sure about that, but the Hammerhead, got a couple of hits through, maybe killed 1 model, and then I wasn't able to charge either. So I was just stuck on my half of the board. He even charged 10 Death Company with Astrath into the Riptide, and the Riptide survived on 1 wound, was able to fall back, and he overwatched and the Riptide still survived on a wound. So it was just it was a massacre, and I clocked, and I just couldn't stop his uppy downy from getting onto primaries, scoring secondaries. So again, opponent scored about 30 points, 35 points at the end of the game, and I was by the start of round 4, I was winning. By the end of round 4, it was 41-47 because I couldn't score much of anything in my round 4 or 5. Unfortunately, that's just what it is. And I also wasn't able to move up to screen out any uppy downy units that he had and move a lot of my units onto primaries because I had my Crisis Suits, Farsight, I had my Skyray, my Shadow Sun, my Stealth Suits, all in range to take over that mid-board objective. And my Ghost Keel, my Devilfish, and my Pathfinders were holding my natural expansion objective. So I was holding 2, and I was just going to move everything up and take him off that third one, charge in there with my Hammerhead to just get more OC. That was my plan, but unfortunately I clocked, and that's just what happens. And I did say I was going to explain why the Ghost Keel was in my mock cost stage is because the Ghost Keel is very good when people decide to infiltrate. And that's one thing that the Space Marines player did against me is he infiltrated on my natural expansion objective. So all I did was I just placed the Ghost Keel 9 inches away from his infiltrators. I got first turn, so I just moved right up to them, shot them, charged them, tank shocked them, and the infiltrators were just stuck there, and then they ended up dying. So Tau doesn't really care about you being able to infiltrate. I actually prefer when people do the whole infiltrating deal, trying to stop me from getting to the mid board, because it's like, okay, well, I'll just sit back, blow a unit off the board, and stay in cover and take an objective while being able to kill a unit. And if I get a killing secondary, it's just even better, right? So I really like the list a lot. I think I could have pulled 5-1, but unfortunately I went 0-3 the last day because I clocked 3 times in a row. Obviously didn't learn my lesson. It's just really tough with Tau because we have a lot of different profiles, a lot of different units. I really like to be precise with my movement, so maybe I take a little bit of time. But one mistake I was making is I just kept forgetting about the clock, and it just kept running down even whenever it wasn't my turn. But yeah, it just happens. Opponent was still fun to play, still a great person, and I had a good time at Clutch City, and I definitely want to go again next year. And I do really, really like this list. But another hard lesson that I learned with GTs is that they're not really lenient on time. We had about 2 hours and 45 minutes to deploy and play, and sometimes we even had to set up the terrain and still deploy and play in 2 hours and 45 minutes. So it was just almost impossible to ever finish. And the thing with Tau, and especially the way I like to play, is I like to trap your units into thinking that you can push me really hard, and then I'm able to just blow you off the board while still staying in cover. And then I score majority of my points in round 4 and 5 when you only have, 3 units left and aren't really able to do damage, and 80% of my army is still alive. That's usually how most of the games go with this list. That's usually my play style. But unfortunately, that's not going to be the best play style in a tournament because you need to really score early. So it favors a lot of aggressive pusher armies, which is what I learned. So I understand why now, why Tau isn't. It's a great. I love the Tau, but they're not great tournament. It's not a great tournament army because a lot of the times you're not going to finish the game. And with Tau, you're really going to have to win at the end of the game when your opponent has less units. At least with Cal Yun. I know with Mont Ka and Retaliation, you can press a little bit harder. which is something I will probably try next time I go to a GT. But yeah, you just got to learn your lesson and keep on going. But yeah, so this is my list. I really liked it. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Thanks for watching.